You know that my heart cringes not just for our world today, but particularly for tomorrow. My passion for raising authentic and visionary leaders is undeniable in all that I do. I remember 2 years ago when I first spoke about the concept of my book, The Leadership Guardian, with one of my mentors. She asked, "What do you want people to feel after reading the book?" My answer was very clear. I want the readers to be sober, become more aware of their awesomeness, and be ignited for 360 degrees transformation in every area of their life. The reviews from the independent readers of the Leadership Guardian has been overwhelming. The Leadership Guardian is truly a transformational movement for those who are tired of mediocrity and are ready to lead a 360-degree transformation in their lives. While I cannot wait for this book to grace your shelf, I most importantly cannot wait for the Leadership Guardian to grace your heart. Let me look forward to it.
Hello, super leaders. Thank you for joining us again on Leadership Chat with Top Business Leaders. My name is Kemi Ogunkoya. I am a leadership development strategist, management consultant, and author of The Leadership Guardian. And I equip business leaders to develop the right competence to perform effectively in their current roles and seamlessly take on higher positions. It's nice to have you here once again. Guess what? The Leadership Chat with Top Business Leaders is a 12 weeks virtual event which holds every Saturday between 7 p.m. and 7:45 p.m. West African time and has been running from the 15th of May and it runs through the 31st of July. And the series focuses on conversations of the elements of the dozen model, a leadership framework that I developed, which consists of 12 key elements for effective and visionary leadership. And they include clarity, connection, character, confidence, consequence, community, consideration, critical thinking, communication, competence, consistency, and community. And I bring to you top leaders over the period of 12 weeks to talk about each of these elements and how you can interact with them for your personal and professional growth. And today, my guest on the show is Chad Kalland, and we shall examine leadership and critical thinking, how critical thinking changes the game for business leaders. And I have no doubt that this will be yet another transformational show. So let's meet Chad. My guest is Chad Kalland, and Chad Kalland is the Chief Executive Officer at Vector Environmental Services, where he has helped grow the business from a 2011 startup boosting one client and 4 employees, and he has taken it global. He's also the co-founder of the Second Story Project, an organization that helps clients create more equitable, diverse, and inclusive workplaces. Mr. Kalland is a community activist working with anti-racism organization in Houston and New Orleans. He serves on the Houston City Advisory Board of Shelters to Shelter, a nonprofit organization addressing the issues of homelessness. Additionally, Chad is a member of the Mankind Project, a global brotherhood of non-profit charitable organizations dedicated to personal development, multicultural awareness, and community service. Since 2010, Chad has been a resident in Texas where he lives with his wife and daughter. And I am absolutely delighted to have him on the show with us today. Hello, Chad. How are
Hey,
you doing?
I'm well, Kemi. How are you?
I'm doing absolutely great. Thank you. It's such a great honor and privilege having you on the show today.
The honor is mine. I appreciate you having me on.
All right. Thank you. So we're going to get right into it, right? So we're talking about critical thinking and leadership. I know we live in a world that seems to be so busy, yet, there's a lot of demand on results.
Mhm.
People really want results for their businesses, and then they want to be able to scale their businesses, take their businesses to the next level. And most importantly, people just want to learn how to become more effective, right? But there
Yep.
seems to be a lot of struggle. It's a very busy world, there's a lot of demand. We live in what we call a VUCA world.
Mhm.
And yet, research has proven that critical thinking is one of the most important elements of effective leadership. So before we get right into it, Chad, What exactly is critical thinking and why does it matter?
Right. Yeah. To me, critical thinking is the ability to take time to analyze a challenge, a struggle, and look at it from a lot of different angles. Look at it from every angle to see that every action, uh, is going to have an effect throughout the organization. And critical thinking is looking at those effects to come up with really the best solution to the challenge you're facing. It takes time, like you said, in a world where everyone wants answers and results right away. Critical thinking is really stepping back from this situation and taking a broad view and looking at the big picture to me.
All right. So looking at the big picture, right? Why should we care about the big picture? If
Yeah.
people want results, as like people want results and they want results now, why
Right.
exactly should they care about the big picture?
Well, I mean, to me, if a problem presents itself, and oftentimes the easy solution and quick solution may solve part of that problem, but it's going to create other problems throughout the organization, right? A simple example is a key employee comes in and he, presents with a challenge and he wants more money, more compensation. The simple solution is to give that employee more money, keep the employee happy, keep the employee. The reality is that decision, that quick snap decision, will have implications. Now, that's a small example of how a simple, quick solution can have ripple effects throughout the organization. But other employees then say, well, if so and so got it, it can have ripple effects throughout the organization without looking at even small decisions like that from a bigger picture. It's just easy to constantly try to put out fire after fire after fire and not really take the whole organization into consideration.
Which means that we have to get to that point where we're able to focus on the big picture. And that to be able to focus on the big picture, leaders have to embrace critical thinking as
Mm-hmm.
a key tool or a key element for growth
Yep.
and especially for decision making. Now, Chad, in your experience, or probably over the years, would you look around and say that a lot of leaders actually leverage critical thinking to its full extent?
I don't think so. I think especially now, you touched on it in the introduction about the urgency of business, right? And at least the perceived urgency where every decision, every everything, every challenge feels like a crisis. So it feels like a lot of times, especially um, mid-level managers and leaders, throughout the organization who may not be the C-level leaders. Um, they're concerned about immediate results. They're held to immediate or short-term targets. So that's their priority. Their priority is to meet those short-term targets without looking at the big picture. And I think that we've put short windows on how we measure success. And I think that limits how people can really spend time to think critically, take in other stakeholders' input, and look at the situation from multiple angles.
Mm. And I would even consider that to be a huge challenge in our world today. Now, you touched on something. You said that they spend time,
Yeah.
critically thinking. So, which means that for leaders to get to that point where they can embrace critical thinking, they have to dedicate time for it, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. Well, it seems to be a lot of challenge, especially in a very busy world.
Yeah.
How much time, and I'd like you to respond to this based on your experience. How much time do you make out for critical thinking? Is it something that you have adopted as a practice? How do you do this, and how are you able to ensure that this also cascades in your organization?
Yeah. I'd love to say I have it, that I'm a master at it. It's always I have to be conscious of it because there are still times where every time my phone rings or my email chimes, I feel like I have to respond right away. Uh, and it's taken practice and really training myself to understand that every email doesn't have to be answered right away. Not every challenge is a crisis. And So I try to, personally, I'm a morning person. I get up early before my family wakes, have a cup of coffee, and try to meditate and really start my morning in mindfulness. And if I can do that, I can carry that through the day, to understand that I can set things aside, really focus on the decision at hand, and then and also take time to talk to other people who this decision will affect, outside of just the immediate challenge that I'm facing. So it really is a habit that has to be built of being mindful of time management. And it's not always easy. I still fall into the trap of, like I said, grabbing my phone every time the email chimes.
Interesting. Now, I'm trying to put, you've said quite a lot of things, right? I'm trying to put them all together.
Yeah.
So you have spoken about the fact that, and I'm just trying to put the pieces together. You spoke about the fact that, there has to be a level of mindfulness to it. You've spoken about the fact that there has to be a level of intentionality. There has to be, time management. There has to be discipline. And, of a truth, I think that all of these also center around self-awareness, right? Because for you to get to that point where you're disciplined enough not to want to pick your phone at every buzz or on every notification, it requires a level of self-awareness and discipline. Now, for those, because I think some people are able to, build themselves up to the level where they can make out time for this, or then they can indulge in these practices. But for some, they believe that critical thinking in itself is a chore and they'll rather not do it. Right? How exactly do people find the balance between appreciating the benefits of critical thinking and considering it as a chore? What exactly is at stake? And what do they stand to gain?
I think some of that, hopefully comes from mentorship. I think, as you work your way up, or as someone works their way up through levels of management, and through levels of leadership, some of those skills become apparent. Hopefully they learn along the way. Unfortunately, sometimes we learn by our mistakes, and by snap judgments. Snap judgments have consequences, and those things sometimes failure or mistakes happen, and you hopefully learn from those. And eventually, hopefully you're working with a mentor who can, that usually that's how I kind of started is when I have a challenge that I think needs some critical thinking around it, is I call a mentor. And that alone just sets some space between the challenge and my response. Just the time to have the conversation with a mentor is a great place to start, because just that one conversation already puts space, gives me time to think about it, gives me time to put things in perspective and hear it from another person who's not so emotionally attached to it.
So, that brings in different perspective, right? And that can really be very huge and instrumental. Now, would you say that there's a process to critical thinking? Does it follow a particular pathway, or, how exactly do people get to start thinking critically?
So I have a process that I use, and it's a process that I came up with. I call it the LIFT process, and it's 4 steps. The first is to listen. Listen to all the stakeholders, listen to understand, really listen to the challenge that's being presented from everyone involved in the challenge, right? So the first step in the LIFT process is to listen. The next step is to identify the real problem. A lot of times, you get a lot of information by listening. And then, you have to sort through that information to really identify what the main problem is, what the main challenge is. And then the next step is to focus on solutions for me. and by that I mean, what is within my power to really affect. There are a lot of, I can wish that a lot of things would happen, but what can I do personally uh, that will have an impact on the situation? And then the final one is to take action. And that's to come up with a really solid game plan, set measurable goals, um, and have a system in place for accountability and feedback. So I'm tracking the progress uh, of the solution that I try to impart. So again, the process I use that I found it works for me in a lot of different situations is LIFT. It's listen, identify the problem, focus on solutions, and then take action.
Wow, wow. So listen, identify the problem, solutions, and then take action.
Yes.
Now, quite a lot of people are able to, analyze situations, right? And then they can tell you exactly what the problem is. But then I love that, the steps that you spoke about talks about solutions, but then taking actions. And I mean that taking action pretty much requires a level of responsibility,
Oh yeah.
right? Which means that you're taking ownership of your result. Now, with the model, the leadership framework that I developed, it's called the dozen model. One of the key elements of the model is consequence, right?
Yeah.
Consequence. And by consequence, it's talking about how we have to get to that point of responsibility where we take responsibility for our actions and then our inactions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when a leader fails to adopt or embrace critical thinking, right? And it's called critical thinking because it goes way beyond just thinking on the surface.
Mm-hmm.
You're able to analyze, the situation, you're able to analyze the context and come up with solutions. What exactly would you consider to be some of the consequences? Probably some of the consequences that are known and some of the unknown consequences, or perhaps I put it as cost of the lack of critical thinking for individuals, leaders, and organization as a whole. Okay, so I
Yeah.
was going to ask another question, but let me start with that one.
Okay. Yeah. I think one of the main ones that I see is really a lack of trust in a leader. The leader comes off as being kind of irrational and not really consistent, right? I think consistency is another one of your 12 principles. And for me, if I see a leader who's seems kind of haphazard in their decisions, I'm reluctant to trust that person. I'm reluctant to follow them. A leader who's not critically thinking and just kind of chasing every problem with a short-term solution. One of the consequences is lack of trust in the people who are supposed to be following. Another is it's a never-ending cycle, I believe, of chasing your tail. If I'm constantly chasing the next problem, the next problem, the next problem, the reality is organizations are complex and challenges present themselves all day, every day. And if my solution to every challenge is to find a real quick fix solution, I never get any work done. Really, it's an impossible solution. It's not sustainable for anyone to work that way. I don't believe. An unintended consequence of someone who's doing that, they may think they're doing a great job of problem solving. They're really burning themselves out, and they're an unintended consequence of that is really burnout and a short-term employee who's not gonna last in the organization.
Fantastic. So I love the fact that you spoke about trust, right? And how this could impact trust because, there are quite a number of people who feel, oh, you know what, it's on me, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then not understanding exactly how it doesn't just stop, on their decks, but then also impacts the culture of the
Oh, yeah.
organization. Now, we have also, I work with a lot of business leaders and within organizations. And then something I hear a lot of times is that, oh, you know what, I wish my team could, you know, deploy more creative thinking, or they could be involved more in strategic work or strategic thinking. How exactly are leaders able to ensure that they have a constituent that is also on that journey of critical thinking? How are they able to ensure that they build or develop a culture of critical thinkers, as employees, as teammates, and as constituents, as the case may be?
Yeah. So I have another. But I use an analogy for this. I call it the goldfish theory. The theory they say is if you take a goldfish and you give it a big tank and clean water and you feed it, it'll grow to the size of its container. I believe the same thing in people. I think if I create a work environment where people have room to grow, there's opportunity for growth professionally and personally. Um, we're not constantly micromanaging. People have the authority and ability to make their own decisions. So give them a big tank, give them clean water, which means an environment that's safe for everyone, where psychological safety is considered, where everyone's voice is valued. That's where my values of inclusion and belonging really come in. Is creating a place that's safe for everyone and everyone can thrive in, and then feeding employees by giving them challenging work, giving them goals to reach, and really pushing them to be the best that they can be by offering opportunities to come up with their own solutions. I think creates a culture where people can really thrive. And I like to say that what I do for a living is open doors and lift ceilings more than anything, and try to give people space to grow. And that's the three things I try to do to make that happen.
Giving people a space to grow.
Yeah.
Now, in a world where, we consider the VUCA world, it's highly volatile, great level of uncertainty, great complexity and ambiguity. How exactly are leaders able to find the balance, between flexibility and critical thinking? Is there even a balance to start with?
Right. I think it goes back to, I think flexibility comes from critical thinking, right? I think that the two kind of go hand in hand. The ability to think critically, to consider other viewpoints, to consider the whole picture, requires you to be flexible. I think if someone is really rigid in their thought or really rigid in their action, they're not going to be able to think critically, because what's the old saying? If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And I think that's the kind of leadership that comes from inflexible or really rigid leadership. So I think to think critically, you have to be flexible.
So flexibility and critical thinking, go hand in hand. I absolutely agree with that, right? I absolutely agree with that. Now, let's look at, critical thinking and its impact on business results, right? So I know that you are the founder of Vector. How have you been able to deploy this tool for your own business?
Yeah. So I have a business partner. My business partner actually founded Vecta, and we started in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And when we were considering expanding into the Houston market where I live and work, we really had to look at a lot of things critically. We had to look at, one, we were the two owners of the business. We had to look at how much funding we had, right? And then think about, do we want to do it ourselves? Should we try to get outside funding? We had to think about who our customers were there. And then how long would it take us to develop new customers in a place where nobody really knew who Vecta Environmental was? We had to consider, where would we find our employees? There's a lot of thought process that went into it. And we took our time. I mean, for a couple of years, we would provide services to our clients in Houston by bringing people from our Louisiana office over, just because we didn't want to rush into it. We really wanted to take our time and make sure that we were making the right decision, because we were thriving in Louisiana. Things were going well. And we could have jumped in too soon in Houston, spent a lot of resources, not gotten the return on investment that we got by waiting, and really kind of slowed our progress or sunk the ship completely if we'd have rushed into that decision. And we've taken that same process to expand to every location we've gone to. And now we have, we have locations all throughout the United States. And it's because we've been taking each one of those steps critically and thought about, where we were going and how we would build that organization from the ground up in that new location.
Fantastic. So I love how you spoke about different areas or different aspects of the business that you had to consider, to arrive at where you are now. Now, I would like us to step out of the business, and now come to the personal, position of a leader. Now, for a leader to be effective, right? There's so many areas, there's so many aspects to also consider. You want to be able to critically assess your own level of resourcefulness, for example. You want to be able to assess your competence, your skills, your talents, and quite a lot of, other areas that are really instrumental for growth. Now, how are leaders able to become objective, enough to be able to embrace their own truth and be able to critically assess themselves appropriately? Because that's also a level of critical thinking that is involved in that. But how are people able to get to that point where they can be objective enough, to get to the point where they can actually leverage critical thinking for personal growth?
Yeah. Growing up, I thought leadership was a solo act, right? I thought it was just the main, the lead character, the star of the show, and I realized that may be the case. There's a lot of times when the leader is under the spotlight or the heat, right? But hopefully that person has mentors, has built a network of support by people that they know and trust, and it doesn't necessarily have to be people in their industry, but they have people who they can trust to help them see things objectively. Objectivity is hard for anyone, I believe, and that's why for me it's important to have kind of a team of support, my board of advisors, who I can rely on when the time comes, and they also keep me in check. They hold me accountable for my behavior. For if I'm saying one thing and acting another way, I have people who will call me on that and make me examine what I'm doing, how I'm showing up, and I can also apply that same lift strategy to myself. Like, okay, so listen to my body and listen to what my body is telling me, because I know when I'm acting out of character, or if I need to take a look at my motives. So identify the real problem, focus on my solution, on what I can do to change it, and then take action.
So if I hear you correctly, Chad, you said that you know how to listen to to yourself, listen to your body. When you are, let me use this like out of character.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, they are not able to critically and objectively assess themselves that way. How did you get there, and what were some of the things or strategies that you imbibed that helped you get to that point where you can know exactly when you are stepping out in line of character?
Yeah, and I don't know, Kemi. I think people do know. I think in your body, I think for me, and sometimes it's the next day, or it's when you get a cold shoulder at work, and for me, my feel like a pit in my stomach. I think our bodies tell us what's going on. I also have done some work on around emotional intelligence. I think every leader should do work around emotional intelligence and really understand how they show up, how their actions impact others, and be aware of those things. Um, but that's how I did it. Is really, if I walk into a room and my heart is racing and my stomach is turning, I can look, I feel that in my body, and then take a breath. Um, as they say, is put a few breaths between the stimulus and the response, and try to examine what's really going on in my body and where is it coming from. And I think everyone has the ability to do that. It does take some practice, but I do think people realize in the minute I tell my 9-year-old daughter, if if she feels like lying about it, it's probably something she shouldn't do, and she understands that. So I think people, in the general sense, um, and I'm also an altruist. I believe most people are doing the best they can. Um, but, I believe you can identify in your body when you are out of character or when something just doesn't feel right.
Now, so I'm going to play devil's advocate,
Yeah.
For a few seconds.
You
And
know?
this is assuming that some people genuinely don't know, right? And it's probably going to be because they haven't built that level of awareness,
Yeah.
or getting to the point where they're able to clearly define what their values are, able to clearly define what their
Yeah.
character is.
Okay.
Probably they focus more on reputation than building really from the root. So
Right.
for those people who fall into that
Yeah.
category, if
Yeah.
they exist,
Right.
right? How did they get to that point? Because you spoke about emotional intelligence, and I absolutely agree that emotional intelligence is an instrumental resource for every leader. Now, let's assume that some people, for whatsoever reason, have not gotten to that point of awareness.
Right.
Let's assume they're in total darkness. How can they develop this level of, awareness of self? How can they get to that point where they can clearly define who they are and what they stand as, what they stand for as leaders?
Yeah. So, an easy way is to listen, right? To listen to the people around you. And if I think, we all have people in our lives who will tell us the hard truth, hopefully, right? And I think to get in it, to achieve any level of leadership, you're going to have people in your life who will tell you the hard truth. And the problem with the hard truth is most times we don't want to hear it. So if someone is trying to achieve a level of leadership, a level of consciousness, the first thing to do is listen to the people close to them. And a lot of times that advice comes unsolicited. In the early times, in the early days of leadership, a lot of the messages I got were not solicited. I thought I was doing one thing the right way, and I had people who were above me in the organizational chart who would tell me that this is the way we want to see it happen. I think it takes intentionality. It takes you have to be motivated to learn about yourself. I had to be motivated to learn about myself. So I said earlier that I think people know. I think that I still think everyone gets in their gut or it feels it in their heart or in their body when they're doing right. There's a sense of personal satisfaction that comes from doing things right. They feel that in their body, and I think there's and maybe they need to know when to hear it or how to address how to recognize it, and that may come from practice. But there has to be a level of intentionality and a want to do these things. But I think anyone who's really interested in leadership and achieving some level of leadership in any aspect of their life, they will have, this is a necessary part of it. Becoming intentional about how I show up, when I'm acting in character, when I'm acting out of character, and then surrounding myself with people who will let me know those things as well.
Amazing. So I have intentionality in one hand, and I have listening in another hand. Then I have, you know, being in that place where you can actually take feedback, in another hand. And one particular thing that I absolutely did really love that you said was that you have to be motivated, to want to learn more about yourself, to want to get to that point of greater
Yeah.
self-awareness. And I think that's absolutely really important because
Mhm.
you really can force people to want to get to know about
Right.
themselves. It comes from that place of personal conviction, and will, and then you're able to, just have the energy to back it up, right?
Mhm.
So I think that's absolutely very, very important. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Yeah.
Now, I'm stepping out of critical thinking now,
Yep.
to just talk about leadership in itself.
Yeah.
You've had an extensive experience and you are, still building on that. Now, what would you say are some of the strategies, that you would recommend for effective leadership in organizations?
Yeah, I think we've touched on a lot of them. I think one is to really understand yourself, to really understand what motivates you, um, what your what your purpose is in doing what you do. A lot of there's a Simon Sinek says it's know your why, right? And um, to really understand what motivates you, and it has to be something beyond money or status, right? I mean, um, really understanding what drives me as a person. And I have a coach who says it's often what you can't help but do in every aspect of your life. I think that's one is really understanding yourself and your motivations. Um, Two is always have several mentors. If you can't have several mentors, have one that you can trust, that you can call on when you need a second opinion, when you need another set of eyes, when you need to be grounded, someone you can call um, to really help guide you. And like I said, it doesn't have to be um, someone in your same industry. It just has to be someone who can be a voice of reason. Uh, and then I've found that professional coaches and personal coaches are a huge help, and they're different than mentors. A coach and a mentor are not the same thing. Uh, Personal coaches and professional coaches are great tools for helping someone develop the tools of leadership that they want to, can help them identify kind of their purpose and what drives them as well. Um, so if you have the resources to hire a coach, I would highly encourage that as well. Um, and then it's hard, but it's important to not be afraid to make a decision. Confidence is another one of your 12 principles. I think that you have to have the confidence to make a mistake sometimes and be willing to take the consequences for those.
Those are absolutely profound. The strategies that you have shared. You spoke about coaching, you spoke about mentorship, you spoke about a place of confidence. Let's touch on communication,
Yeah.
just for a bit,
Mhm.
right? Because when we talk about critical thinking, there is a part of critical thinking that hinges on interpersonal communication
Mhm.
skills, right? And then there's a part that also hinges on interpersonal communication skills. Now, staying a little bit with the interpersonal communication skills, how are we as business leaders and for anyone who is listening able to develop, the ability to critically think, yet able to communicate in a positive way or in a positive light with them? And, I ask this question because trying to understand how the human mind works, sometimes a lot of people genuinely that journey of awareness and that journey of becoming a better version of themselves, but then communicate negatively to themselves. So it doesn't matter how well they're able to critically think, they're not able to achieve the full benefit of that because of their poor communication strategies or methods to self.
Yes.
How exactly is a leader able to, you know, critically have conversations with themselves, which can be self talk, where you're able to critically analyze certain elements of your personal life, yet, not get to that point where such personal relationship with self becomes, abusive or becomes negative?
Yeah, I tell my daughter a lot of times, talk to yourself like you would talk to your best friend. Because if I do something that falls short of perfect, I can be so hard on myself. Part of what makes people successful is to hold themselves to a high standard, right? And I can be a bit of a perfectionist at times. And if I do something that's 95% right, I pick apart that 5%. Uh, but if my friend did the same thing, I would talk to them completely different. Uh, so one simple way that I try to remind people is talk to yourself like you talk to your best friend. Be as supportive to yourself as you would to someone you love dearly. And by treating yourself as a beloved person, that helps. It's again, this is another instance where I'm not perfect in my execution of this strategy, but I know it works. And if I can remind myself in the instance to talk to myself like I'm someone I care about, it usually softens the tone of my self talk.
That's a great strategy. Absolutely. And I think if people are able to look at it from that aspect, because sometimes a lot of people are a whole lot nicer to other people
Oh yeah.
than themselves. So if
Mhm.
you look at how you talk to a friend, you're able to apply the same principles to your personal communication. It absolutely
Yeah.
will go a long way in
Oh
resolving
yeah.
some of the negative showdown.
Hmm.
Wow, it's been a great, great, great time talking with you,
Yeah.
Chad. There has
Uh,
been a lot of lessons, a lot of insights, a lot of nuggets that you have shared from your wealth of experience. And I'm absolutely grateful to you for coming on the show. Thank you very much. Now,
oh,
just in case, there are other questions from, our viewers, how exactly can people find you online? Are you on LinkedIn?
I am on LinkedIn, Chad Kalland. You can also email me at info@secondstoryproject.com. But the easiest way is LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn a lot. So that's the easiest way to find me. And I want to thank you, Kemi. This has been great. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for inviting me on and having me on.
I absolutely did have a great time. So
Yeah.
thank
Yeah.
you so much. You shared a lot of insight, guys. There's been so much insight, amazing tips, nuggets, and strategies that have been shared with us today. And like I always say, insights without actions will always be useless,
Mm,
right? So you want to take
absolutely.
all these notes, take all these actions, and run with it. We're on the journey of becoming a better leader, becoming a better version of ourselves, and there should be nothing in your way. So, the show comes to an end
Mm,
today. And I am absolutely looking forward to another great show next week. But until then, keep leading and keep being amazing. So take care and see you again.
thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.